Last video, we covered the 10 most powerful orcs in 40k. The comment section ran hot for days. Debates about kill counts, ordering complaints, one person writing out a full war song in orc dialect. But one demand rose above all of it. A comment at 134 likes put it exactly. What about Tuska? The orc who invaded the warp to fight demons forever, who died, and then got brought back by Khorne himself. Not as a thrall, not as a slave, but because the fighting was too good to let end. That's today's video. 5 orc legends the last list didn't reach, named specifically in the comments. The thesis is simple. The orc roster in 40k runs so deep that a top 10 barely scratches it, and the characters left out include feats so unhinged they compete with everything already covered. Starting with the one you asked for most, Tuska Demon-Killa. In 890 M41, an Ork Kill Kroozer called the Gorejaw was in warp transit when its Geller field failed. The Geller field is the technology that separates a ship and everything aboard it from the raw psychic environment of the warp. A bubble of protected real space punched through a dimension made of pure emotional energy and the will of gods. Without it, the hull might as well not exist. What's outside comes through. A greater demon came through. Not a minor warp entity, not a small incursion. A greater demon, one of the direct physical embodiments of a chaos god's will, capable of manifesting in real space with enough power to tear through armored bulkheads and scatter entire squads of orcs just by arriving. It moved through the Gorejaw the way a fire moves through dry timber. Crew members died in the corridors. The screaming propagated forward through the ship, deck by deck, getting louder as it got closer to where Tuska was. Tuska rigged up his power claw and ran toward the screaming. The fight on the bridge wasn't fast. A greater demon doesn't go down in a handful of blows. These are entities assembled from the fundamental substance of the warp, nearly impossible to destroy permanently, even with weapons specifically designed for the task. Tuska took serious damage across the fight. He bled. He nearly died. He won anyway, standing over a demonic corpse in a corridor that had been a command bridge before the fight ruined it, holding a demon's skull he'd decided was a trophy. Most beings would process a demon boarding action as a catastrophic near-death experience. Tuska processed it as a discovery. He'd spent his life fighting other orcs, fighting Imperial Guard, fighting whatever obstacles came between one engagement and the next. None of it had felt like that. None of it had been nearly as good. From that moment, he called himself Demon-Killa, and regular warfare became a problem of availability. He wanted to fight demons, and he'd have to go somewhere specific to find them. Tuska doesn't have an official Games Workshop miniature. He appears across 2 Codex editions, is one of the most beloved figures in Orc lore, and GW has never produced a model. What exists instead are fan builds. One of the more elaborate community conversions uses a metal Lord of the Rings cave troll as the armature, bigger than any standard orc kit, proportioned wrong in ways that feel like warp exposure rather than anatomy. Demon Prince arms grafted on, a Blood Bowl black orc head, a Killacan armor piece bolted to the chest, a trophy rack running up the back, loaded with bloodletter skulls and human skulls and whatever the builder could source. Extra toes sculpted onto the feet because spending enough time in Khorne's domain leaves marks. The finished model is enormous and genuinely unsettling in exactly the way Tuska should be. That's the community's portrait of him. Games Workshop hasn't provided an official answer. What Tuska needed for his plan was weird boys, orc psychers who channel the raw energy generated by the collective Wa field. A warband generates psychic pressure just by existing, a constant roar of biological aggression that accumulates with every orc added to the mob, and weird boys are the ones who can actually shape that energy into something usable. They're unstable. They explode occasionally. Their heads swell and burst under excessive psychic load, which in a Wa happens frequently enough that experienced ones learn to tie their heads to their bodies with ropes. Tuska gathered as many as he could find, which tells you something about how committed he was to this specific plan. His fleet reached the Cadian system. The Cadian Gate is the primary choke point between the Eye of Terror and the rest of the Imperium, the system around which 13 Black Crusades have broken across 10,000 years of warfare, the most heavily defended corridor in human-controlled space, maintained by permanent armies of Cadian Guard who do nothing else, generation after generation, except hold that line against whatever comes out of the eye. Tuska looked at it and saw a warm-up location. His Wa hit Prosen, the training world the Cadian regiments used for drills. Harsh terrain, experienced soldiers, nothing of strategic value. His forces assaulted it, fought the guard across its surface, pushed the defenders back toward their breaking point, and then, without explanation, disengaged and left. Imperial High Command spent days trying to determine the tactical logic. The answer was that there wasn't any, not by Imperial standards. Tuska had used the most fortified training ground in the sector to knock the rust off before his actual objective. Practice rounds against the Imperium's best soldiers, and then on to the Eye. His weird boys opened the path. The fleet entered the Eye of Terror with shields deliberately lowered, because Tuska wanted the demons to detect them coming. Wanted them to know something was in the warp that wasn't supposed to be there. The Wa plunged into one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy, with the lights on and the engines loud. What the Orks found inside is described in sources drawing on the Codex text. Planets of flickering crystal, worlds assembled from living silk, a planet cut like a gem from solid thought. These are Tzeentch domains, places where the physical laws in effect are whatever the god of scheming and mutation prefers them to be. Slaanesh domains, full of temptresses built from every forbidden pleasure at once. Khornate kill zones steeped in centuries of accumulated violence and blood. Tuska's forces didn't discriminate. They attacked whatever they found, on whichever world they landed, and moved on when the fighting ran dry. For a human force, entering the Eye isn't a sustained military option. It's measured in degrees of psychic attrition. Astartes with active Geller fields, trained chaplains, and decades of conditioning against corruption still suffer. Extended exposure breaks minds. The Chaos Gods offer what you secretly want, and the longer you're inside their territory, the more precisely they can identify what that is. What they offer Orks, apparently, is nothing useful. Orks already want exactly what they're doing. Tuska's forces moved through multiple demon worlds, fought sustained engagements on chaos-consecrated ground, and nobody turned. The warp is a terrible place for anything that can be tempted. Tuska's warband had a remarkably limited temptation surface. The Wa dwindled with every engagement. Boys falling on each world, the fleet thinning, the warband contracting toward its core as it plunged deeper. Tuska didn't stop or turn around. He had one objective, and he hadn't reached it yet. At the end of the road, a planet made of flesh. Blood ran across its surface in rivers. The ground was organic, warm, pulsing in places, stained the particular red that means old violence compacted into geography. When Tuska made planetfall and found nothing waiting for him, nothing coming to fight, he shot the ground with his shuta. The planet shook beneath his boots. He looked at his boys. He looked back down at the ground he'd just shot, at the way it had shuddered and rippled like something alive. He raised his eyes to the assembled warband and gave an order that summarizes his entire character in 3 words. Fire everything. Every orc, every gun, every piece of Daka still operational, directly into the ground. The surface split open. Bloodletters tore up from beneath in waves, charging immediately into the orc mob, axes already swinging. Skulls exploded. Boys went down in clusters. The ground continued to fracture as the demonic forces surged upward, and then, from somewhere deep in the planet itself, the reason this world was the way it was. the demon prince of Khorne who lorded over this domain in the Eye of Terror, referred to across accounts of the battle simply as the Blood Prince. A former mortal, elevated to demonic status by Khorne's direct favor, carrying that favor as physical reality, size, power, the full weight of a god's endorsement made manifest in a single entity. A demon prince isn't a greater demon to be tangled with opportunistically. These are the top of the chaos power hierarchy below the gods themselves, and each one is effectively unique, a distinct weapon shaped by millennia of service. Dueling one as a single orc war boss, even a particularly large and experienced one, is roughly equivalent to fighting a superhuman war engine with a mechanical claw and aggressive personal confidence. Tuska fought him for hours. The battle proceeded in waves. Tuska took wounds that would have killed most beings, taking impacts from the Blood Prince's weapons that punched through armor and opened him up, backing off long enough to keep fighting, coming forward again. His boys died around him, one by one, until the warband that had invaded an entire region of the Eye of Terror was down to a handful of survivors, and then those died too. Tuska and the Blood Prince dueling while the flesh planet ran with the blood of the Wa. Eventually the Demon Prince got him pinned, a blade driven through his gut, Tuska on the ground with the Blood Prince above him proclaiming victory over the orc who'd come all this way just to die here, far inside the warp, with nobody left to carry the story out. Tuska raised his power claw. Both of them died. The entire Wa, every orc who'd followed him from the Gorejaw through the Cadian Gate, through the demon worlds to this blood-soaked flesh planet at the edge of everything, gone. The campaign ended, definitively, on a world that shouldn't exist. Khorne had been watching the whole time. Chaos gods don't reward their enemies. Khorne specifically exists as the distillation of violence, bloodshed, and martial domination. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, isn't poetry. It's the operational description of a divine entity whose entire existence is the war drive made infinite. He watched an orc bypass the most defended system in the galaxy uninvited, invade his own domain, conquer multiple demon worlds, fight for months in chaos territory without corruption, personally duel a demon prince to mutual destruction, and manage one last strike from the ground while dying. He watched all of this and reached the one conclusion an orc would find completely natural. That was the best fight he'd seen in some time, and he wanted it to happen again. Codex Chaos Demons, 6th edition, page 11, states it directly. The blood god was so impressed by their limitless battle lust that he took the orcs into his own domain. Not as prisoners, not as trophies, as entertainment. Tuska's Wa was resurrected inside Khorne's realm before the brass citadel itself, the fortress at the center of the blood god's domain, the seat of the most violent of the chaos gods, surrounded by the accumulated war geography of his territory. That's where they wake up now. Every cycle, Tuska and his boys come back to life on the blood-stained foothills outside those gates, and Khorne's demonic forces come at them. The battle described in the Codex plays out the same way each time. Both sides fight, both sides die. As the orcs fall, great clouds of fungal spores are released from their bodies, taking root in the blood-soaked ground. New orcs grow from those spores, mature, and charge back into the fight. The Blood Prince's forces return simultaneously. Dawn breaks and the slaughter resumes. Every day, eternally. Before the brass citadel, in the shadow of the skull throne. The lore community's observation about this arrangement holds up under examination. Tuska is the only being in all of Warhammer 40k to have achieved an unambiguous happy ending. The setting's tone is one of relentless grimness, civilizations crumbling, heroes dying for minor delays and catastrophe, victory measured in how much you lost achieving it. Tuska spent his career searching for the best fight available, found it, and through the paradox of impressing a chaos god who had every reason to hate him, got locked into that exact fight for the rest of time. He is, by his own criteria, living perfectly. His last recorded words, attributed to him across the lore accounts. "Told yer I knew where de best fightin' was." He was right. One open question the lore doesn't settle, whether Tuska and his boys accumulate growth across cycles or reset each time. Ork biology is real. They grow larger with combat experience, physical size tracking directly with fighting history. Orks who fight constantly, in the warp where time moves at whatever rate the warp decides, over a duration that could be centuries by any external measurement, that accumulation could be enormous. The lore leaves it genuinely open, and that open question sits in the background of every description of his current situation. If the spores reset them, they're consistent forever. If they don't, the warband before the Brass Citadel is something else by now. And whatever it's becoming, Khorne keeps sending more demons at it. Cap'n Bloodflag arrived as the second highest demand in the comment thread. The comment that generated 166 total engagement laid out his story in 3 escalating stages: surviving an exterminatus, helping kill a demon prince, stealing an inquisitor's hat. The first one needs a correction, and the correction makes his story better. Captain Bloodflag is a freebooter captain, operating outside any settled WoG, mercenary and chaotic even by Ork standards. Every piece of his lore comes from Dawn of War 2, Retribution, the 2010 real-time strategy game by Relic Entertainment. He's the playable protagonist of the Ork campaign. Video game lore sits below codex entries in the Warhammer hierarchy, and lore purists are fair to note this. Worth covering anyway. His ship crashed on Typhon, a jungle world, during the Third Aurelian Crusade. Losing your void ship to a jungle world is normally the kind of setback that ends a campaign permanently. Without the ship, the captain is stranded, cut off from resupply, operating in hostile territory on borrowed time. Bloodflag defeated the Eldar forces on Typhon, including their commander Eotarch Kalath, and somehow shifted his entire operation off the jungle world and onto Calderis, a desert planet with a considerably worse problem than Eldar. A Khornate demon prince named Kyrus was operating on Calderis. The imperial response to confirmed demon prince incursion is established in the lore. When the threat exceeds what conventional military force can address, and the risk of demonic spread can't be contained, the order is exterminatus. Cyclonic torpedoes, virus bombs, orbital lance strikes sustained long enough to sterilize the planetary surface from space. Every living thing on Calderis. The chaos threat made the entire world forfeit. That order was being prepared. Bloodflag looked at the situation. A world about to be burned from orbit, an unkillable demon at the center of it. Imperial forces queuing the most extreme response in their arsenal, and decided this was a waste of a planet. He allied with Imperial Space Marines and Guard, an Ork pirate working alongside the Adeptus Astartes and the Imperial Guard in a coordinated cross-faction operation, motivated entirely by his own mercenary logic and a deep personal objection to scorched earth solutions that destroy everything, including anything worth taking. The combined forces closed on Kyrus. Bloodflag fought the Demon Prince directly, inflicting enough damage to bring Kyrus down from full demonic capacity to something vulnerable, then ordered a rock bombardment from orbit. Kyrus was destroyed. The Chaos incursion was broken. The justification for exterminatus no longer existed, and the order was cancelled. He didn't survive an exterminatus. He made one unnecessary. A world was scheduled for complete orbital annihilation, every living thing on its surface targeted from space, and Bloodflag is the reason that order never executed. He fought his way to a position where the Imperium didn't need to burn anything, absorbed the tactical reality of a demon prince on the battlefield, and solved the problem before the extreme solution became the only option. At some point in the campaign's aftermath, he encountered Inquisitor Adrastea. Imperial Inquisitors operate with a level of authority that makes Space Marine captains pay attention. They can commandeer entire fleets, condemn worlds, Extract compliance from any imperial institution, including the Astartes. As a non-imperial entity, encountering an inquisitor at close range tends to go one direction. Bloodflag tossed her aside and stole her hat. Not her inquisitorial seal, not her weapons, not anything that would factor into a military or strategic calculation. Her hat. 2 separate replies in the original video's comment thread expanded on this specific detail. 10 likes, then 6. People specifically adding context to the hat because the hat was the part they found most worth discussing. That reaction tells you everything about why this story works. Cosmic stakes, faction-breaking alliances, demon prince kills, and the character's personal victory condition is a piece of headwear that belonged to someone who could have had him executed. Bloodflag has his priorities straight, and his priorities are different from everyone else's. No official Games Workshop tabletop miniature exists for Bloodflag. His visual identity lives in the Dawn of War 2 game assets. Fans who want to run him on a table build their own. The hat is presumably hand-sculpted. 8 likes on a comment that read simply, "He did Nazdreg dirty." In a comment section running mostly warm and celebratory, that specific frustration stands out. The grievance is factually grounded. Substantial codex lore exists for Nazdreg that builds a fuller profile than the original video reached. So here's the longer version. Nazdreg Ugg-Erdgrub is the warlord of the Bad Moons clan. Bad Moons are the wealthiest of the Ork clans, defined by ostentatious excess, the best guns Teef can buy, and an aesthetic that sits somewhere between warband commander and pirate aristocrat. The clan has the fastest-growing Teef, Ork currency, literally their teeth, which regrow after use in trade. And they spend compulsively on the flashiest, most over-engineered equipment available. Nazdreg is large, overweight, extraordinarily rich even by Bad Moon standards, and described in canonical sources as the most cunning and intelligent battlefield commander the clan has ever produced. He speaks Imperial Gothic fluently. For an Ork, that represents a genuine cognitive investment. Most of his species doesn't bother developing that level of cross-species communication, because why would they? Nazdreg decided the intelligence advantage was worth it. His defining achievement isn't a kill or a conquest, it's an invention. Nazdreg commissioned his mech boys, including one who became known to Imperial intelligence as Orkimedes, to develop a functional teleportation system. What they produced is a teleporta, a device enabling Nazdreg to deploy troops directly from his space hulk onto a planetary surface, bypassing active surface defenses entirely. The Codex Orks text is specific. The device enabled Nazdreg to maneuver his troops directly onto the planet from his space hulk, even when conventional defensive measures were running. Reliable combat teleportation is genuinely rare in the 40K setting. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains ancient teleportarium chambers as sacred relics, operated by dedicated tech priests who treat each activation as a significant event, requiring extensive preparation and carrying real failure rates. Space Marine Terminator squads use teleportarium systems that trace back to pre-heresy technology, carefully maintained over 10,000 years, and those systems still malfunction. Reliable, combat-ready teleportation that can be deployed tactically is the kind of capability that changes how wars are fought. It removes the surface-to-orbit bottleneck that makes planetary assaults so costly, drops troops past the defenses entirely, and collapses the operational timelines that defenders depend on. Nazdreg's mech boys built a version that worked well enough to stake military campaigns on. In 997 M41, he tested it. The invasion of Piscina IV, alongside Ghazghkull Thraka, was militarily a failure. The world wasn't secured, the WOG withdrew. That outcome was deliberate. The invasion was a field test. Ghazghkull only needed proof that the system was functional before deploying it against Armageddon, which is exactly what happened next. Orkimedes subsequently appears in Codex Armageddon, associated with the forces that struck one of the most significant imperial planets in recent history. Whether Nazdreg himself fought at Armageddon is contested across sources. Some place him there, others note he wasn't present at the final engagement. But his invention was there, and his mech boy was there. The Wog that twice nearly broke the Imperium was enabled by teleportation technology Nazdreg commissioned and field-tested years before Armageddon was ever planned. The Medusa 5 campaign is the story that gets lost. His Space Hulk, the Scylla, crashed on Medusa 5, a catastrophic loss of his primary vessel, the kind of setback most warlords don't recover from. Nazdreg's response was to run a multi-stage intelligence operation. He scavenged materials from the crash site to repair a smaller ship. He used that smaller ship to capture the Imperial vessel Minnow. He used the Minnow to broadcast false distress signals into Imperial communications channels, waited for the response, then ambushed and commandeered the full Imperial battleship, Terra's Defense. He arrived on Medusa 5 commanding a Space Hulk and left commanding an Imperial capital ship, having lost one vessel and used a captured shuttle as bait to acquire something enormously larger. That's a long con run against the Imperial Navy, executed in a war zone by an Ork. The canonical in-universe assessment of his ceiling from the Codex lore text. If Nazdreg ever applied himself to leading a full Wog, he would be an adversary every bit as dangerous as Ghazghkull Thraka himself. Ghazghkull, who twice launched the largest Ork Wogs in recent history, who the lore explicitly confirms is weaker only than the beast of M32, the most powerful Ork in recorded history. That's the comparison the lore applies to Nazdreg when evaluating his potential. His original miniature was produced in 1997 for the 2nd edition Codex, with artwork by John Blanche, out of production since. Across successive editions, Games Workshop compressed Ork lore, and Nazdreg went from a fully developed, named character with his own model to a few paragraphs, then to passing mentions. The Bad Moon warlord who invented the teleportation technology that shaped Armageddon exists as a vintage blister pack in collector storage. That's what "done dirty" means. Not a mistake in the original video, but an inherited diminishment from GW's own edition management that this audience has been tracking for years. 25 comments in the thread named Ufthak Blackhawk. Several specifically mention the Mechlord and a Tech Wog in the same breath, and those details aren't from Tuska's campaign. They belong to Ufthak, and covering him correctly means explaining exactly what the Mechlord is and why the distinction matters. Ufthak Blackhawk was created by Black Library author Mike Brooks for the novel Brutal Cunnin. Brooks is direct about the origin. Ufthak Blackhawk, the star of Brutal Cunnin, is a creation from my own brain, albeit within the pre-existing world of Warhammer 40,000. He's Bad Moon's clan, best equipment, loudest possible color scheme, the kind of green that announces itself across a battlefield. When Brutal Cunnin begins, he's a boy. Not a boss, not a champion, not a war boss. A rank-and-file Ork serving in the Tech Wog of his war boss, the Mechlord. The Tech Wog is a specific Wog subtype organized around Mechboy innovation, where engineering capacity functions as a primary weapon system rather than support. Where a standard Wa throws mobs at problems and trusts in numbers and aggression, a Tech Wa brings Mechboys forward, treats technological advantage as the fighting edge, and produces warfare that looks more like a demolition derby than a conventional assault. But a demolition derby with working teleportation guns and shock rifles. The Mechlord runs one of these in Brutal Cunnin, and Ufthak starts the series as a small part of it. The Mechlord and Tech Wa, the comments remembered, aren't Tuska's. Tuska's campaign used Weird Boys for the warp navigation. Ufthak is the character with the Mechlord, and the community conflated the two in their enthusiasm, which is a reasonable mistake when you're excited about multiple unhinged Ork stories at once. What makes the Brutal Cunnin trilogy unusual for Warhammer fiction is its structure. Ork biology is canonical and documented. They grow larger with combat experience, physical size tracking directly with history and status. Most novels note this in passing as background texture. Mike Brooks built it into the plot architecture. Ufthak literally increases in size across the 3 books, Brutal Cunnin, De Big Daka, and War Boss, with distinct growth events that readers track through the series. He starts at regular boy dimensions, and by the end of his arc is operating at something approaching War Boss scale. One documented growth event early in the series involves his head being surgically reattached to a significantly larger body following battlefield injuries. The orcs around him perform this procedure with the medical philosophy of, "It's bigger, so it should be fine," and it mostly is. He goes from knob proportions to boss scale to something the lore around him starts treating with increasing caution. The feat that defines his combat record in Brutal Cunnin is the Warlord Titan kill. A Warlord-class Titan is one of the largest walking war machines the Adeptus Mechanicus fields. Armored in plates that shrug off sustained weapons fire from most conventional sources, protected by void shields that must be stripped by concentrated energy weapons before the hull is even exposed. Armed with weapon systems capable of destroying armored columns in single volleys. The void shields specifically are designed to make a Titan resistant to ground-level engagement. They're projected around the hull, absorbing incoming fire until overloaded, making the machine effectively immune to the kind of attack an individual combatant could make. Ufthak destroyed one by using his shock rifle's teleportation mechanic to bypass the void shields entirely, shock jumping through the field and crashing directly into the Titan's interior, through the eye, into the crew section. Not an artillery solution, not coordinated assault stripping the shields layer by layer. One orc teleporting past the protection entirely and dealing with the crew inside the machine personally. De Big Daka, released early 2024, takes him somewhere the lore treats as essentially unsurvivable. The Mechlord's operations send Ufthak's mob into the webway, the transdimensional tunnel network the Eldar constructed over millions of years, threaded through the fabric of space-time in pathways that bypass real space entirely. Following those tunnels in the wrong direction, or the right direction if you have no survival instincts, leads to Khorne, the Drukhari Dark City, a pocket dimension optimized over 10,000 years specifically as the most concentrated environment of pain, death, and suffering in the setting. The Drukhari harvest psychic suffering the way the orcs generate psychic energy from violence. It powers them, literally, and Khorne is the infrastructure built to maximize that harvest. Space Marine companies have entered Khorne and not returned. That outcome isn't accidental. It's the designed function of the place. Ufthak arrives in Khorne, and the Drukhari immediately attempt to rout him into their gladiatorial arena for a scheduled execution by combat. A Drukhari explains this to him with what passes in their culture for courtesy, the ceremony of telling someone exactly how they're going to die. Ufthak's response to the threat of arena execution isn't fear. It isn't negotiation. He introduces himself. In Dahomey language, you'd call me Ufthak Blackhawk. He's been fighting his entire life, has grown to something approaching war boss scale doing it, has killed a warlord titan from the inside, and his response to a dark city optimized for killing beings like him is to tell them his name. The arena just has walls. Games Workshop released an official plastic miniature for Ufthak in 2024 as a Black Library celebration model alongside De Big Daka. Currently available retail on the GW web store, the only character in today's video with a production model you can purchase right now. He's depicted with an attack squig and his snaz hammer power weapon, enough visual attitude to confirm he made it out of Khorne with something worth smashing. His Warhammer Legends rules sheet classifies him at War Boss tier for casual play. For anyone who wants to run him on the table, the rules exist and the model exists, and he's enormous. Everything we've covered today, Tuska's eternal demon war, Blood Flag making a planetary exterminatus unnecessary, Nazdreg inventing teleportation technology that enabled the assault on Armageddon, Ufthak growing from a regular boy into something that kills titans from the inside. All of it describes what modern orcs look like after 60 million years adrift, without the civilization that created them. The term Krork appears in Codex Necrons from the 3rd edition, the earliest canonical source for the name, and what it points to is the original version. The Old Ones were one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations the galaxy produced, operating across a time period so deep it predates the concept of human prehistory. When the Necrons and their Catan star god masters launched the War in Heaven, a conflict for total galactic dominance waged over millions of years, the Old Ones needed a purpose-built warrior species to counter it. They engineered the Krork, not a civilization that happened to be good at war, a species designed from the genetic level upward to be the most effective martial force the Old Ones could produce, fielded against the most militarily advanced civilization in galactic history. 12 meters tall by some accounts, roughly 39 feet. A Primarch, engineered by the Emperor of Mankind from the most advanced biological science humanity ever developed, stands somewhere between 2 and 3 meters in full power armor. Placed next to a Primarch, a Krork is looking down from approximately 4 times that height. Placed next to a modern Ork warboss, already running 7 to 8 feet, already something most human soldiers couldn't stop in direct engagement, a warboss reaches roughly knee height on a Krork. No official model exists for them. Their visual presence in the setting is text-based, measured by what other things are positioned next to them in descriptions. The technology they fielded is understood to have been comparable to Necron military capacity, the same systems that modern Necron dynasties maintain as irreplaceable artifacts, maintained by cryptechs who spend lifetimes preserving ancient machines that can't be rebuilt. The Krork produced comparable equipment as functional military issue. Their intelligence and coordination were proportionally elevated, beings capable of sustained strategic cognition that the Krork's modern descendants have largely lost. Then the Old Ones died. The War in Heaven's psychic cost was so severe that the tearing damage inflicted on the boundary between real space and the warp allowed the Chaos Gods to coalesce as coherent, active entities. The civilization that designed the Krork was gone. The warrior species they built was left to manage itself in a galaxy that had just destroyed itself. Modern Orks are what the Krork became over the next 60 million years without supervision. No Krork have been confirmed encountered in the current era of 40K lore. The setting doesn't close the door on whether any still exists somewhere, but documented contact with a living one hasn't appeared in any canonical source. Whether they're extinct, dormant, or simply beyond the edges of where current events have reached is an open question the lore leaves deliberate space around. The question the Krork leaves behind isn't really about them. It's about the frame around everything else in this video. Tuska bypassed the Cadian Gate, invaded Khorne's domain, and impressed a Chaos God into granting him eternal war. Blood Flag ran a cross-faction campaign that canceled a planetary extinction order and walked away with a hat. Nazdreg invented the teleportation technology that reshaped the wars for Armageddon, then lost a Space Hulk and left Medusa 5 commanding an Imperial battleship. Ufthak went from a boy in a tech wah to a Titan killer who introduced himself to the dark city of the Drukhari by giving them his name. Ghazghkull launched the largest wahs in recent history and remains the most dangerous active orc in the galaxy. The Beast, in M32, was estimated at the scale of a Hab block, an orc so large that Ghazghkull himself is confirmed in lore as the weaker combatant when measured against him. All of that is the devolved version. Every orc in this video is a degraded copy of something the Old Ones built to fight gods. The spores, the Wah field, the innate biological aggression that makes orcs grow when they fight and keep fighting when they're already dead. All of its inheritance from engineering that was meant to defeat the Catan, the star-consuming entities of pure physics who still haunt Necron vaults across the galaxy. What we call orcs are the rough draft left behind when the architects disappeared. The finished product stood 12 meters tall and went to war against beings that ate suns. Tuska, Blood Flag, Nazdreg, Ufthak, the Krork. 5 characters the first list didn't reach, named specifically in the comments. You spotted the gaps. You named these characters by name, and you were right about all of them. Drop whoever we still haven't reached in the comments below. The roster goes deeper. Subscribe for more stories like this.